Picture a house on a narrow street in Kyoto, so tight between its neighbors that two people meeting in the doorway have to turn sideways to pass. Almost everyone who steps inside says some version of the same thing before they've even taken off their shoes. This feels bigger than my own home. It isn't. It's smaller, on paper, by a real, measurable amount. The house isn't hiding extra square footage anywhere. What it's hiding is 10 quiet decisions, made room by room, about where every object is allowed to live the moment it isn't being used. None of them cost much. None of them required a single wall to move. Stay with me, because idea number 7 is the one almost every Western home gets backwards without realizing it. And the very last idea isn't really an idea at all. It's the principle every other one on this list has secretly been serving the whole time. This is the Japanese Reset, where we explore small Japanese ideas that can make everyday life calmer, cleaner, and more intentional. Before we walk through the house together, one honest note. This isn't a claim that every small Japanese home looks like a magazine spread, or that clutter never happens in Japan. It's a look at a design tradition that has spent centuries solving one very specific problem: limited space and a set of habits worth borrowing regardless of how many square feet you actually have. It also helps to name up front why square footage alone doesn't determine whether a home feels small. Two houses can share the exact same floor plan, down to the inch, and still produce completely different reactions the moment someone walks through the door. The difference almost never comes down to how much space exists. It comes down to how much of that space is currently visible, uninterrupted, to the human eye. A room can be objectively large and still feel cramped if every surface in it is doing something. And a room can be objectively small and still feel spacious if the eye is allowed to travel across it without constantly hitting an obstruction. That single distinction, visible space versus actual square footage, is what today's 10 ideas are all quietly built around. Let's start at the door, because that's where the feeling of a home either begins or quietly falls apart within the first 3 seconds of walking in. Idea 1. Shoes stored vertically, not scattered horizontally. In an ordinary Western entryway, shoes tend to spread. A pair kicked off here, another shoved against the wall. A third pair nobody quite remembers to put anywhere at all. Multiply that by every person living in the house, and a meaningful stretch of floor near the door quietly disappears under footwear. People let this happen because bending down to store a shoe properly feels like one more small task in an already busy transition from outside to inside. But here's the hidden cost. The floor near your entrance is exactly where your eye lands the instant you walk through a door, and a cluttered sightline there sets the emotional tone for the entire room behind it, whether you consciously notice it or not. In many traditional Japanese entryways, there's a slim, purpose-built cabinet running straight up the wall instead of out across the floor, holding shoes stacked vertically rather than sprawled sideways, the same number of pairs, taking up almost none of the visible ground. The replacement action doesn't require built-in carpentry. A narrow shoe rack, even a cheap one, turned to stand tall instead of wide, reclaims a surprising amount of floor the moment it's installed. The shift is simple. A home doesn't feel small because of what it holds. It feels small because of what's sitting on the floor where your eye expects open space. Once that first line of sight is clear, everything behind it, even clutter you haven't dealt with yet, reads as slightly less overwhelming than it did a moment ago. Idea 2. One single catch point for everything that would otherwise drift. Keys, mail, loose coins, a receipt nobody's ready to throw away yet. In most homes, all of it lands wherever a hand happens to be free, usually the nearest flat surface, which slowly turns into an unofficial junk shelf nobody chose on purpose. Give it long enough, and that one surface starts attracting more of the same. The way a single unwashed dish in a sink somehow invites 3 more within a day. A common approach in Japanese entryways is a single small tray or shallow basket, placed once, deliberately, near the door. Keys go there, mail goes there. Everything that would otherwise colonize the surface has exactly one place it's allowed to live, and nowhere else it's allowed to spread to. The tray doesn't just hold objects, it ends a decision that would otherwise have to be made fresh every single time you walk in with your hands full. The practical action is choosing one small tray today and treating anything landing outside it as something to be moved, not something to be tolerated. We've handled the doorway, the first 3 seconds of walking in. Now let's move into the room that usually accumulates the most quiet clutter of all. Idea 3. Matching containers instead of a mismatched collection. Most kitchens over years end up with a drawer or cabinet full of storage containers that never quite match. Different shapes, different brands, curved edges wasting the square space around them, lids that belong to nothing currently in the cabinet. Reach in for a specific size, and you often end up pulling out 3 or 4 before finding the one that actually fits what you're storing. This happens gradually, one purchase at a time, never as a single decision. The hidden cost is visual, not just spatial. A cabinet of mismatched shapes takes real, measurable effort for your eyes to process, because your brain can't group it into one simple unit the way it can with identical, aligned objects. Psychologists call this basic tendency chunking, the brain's habit of processing a group of identical, aligned items as a single unit instead of registering each one separately, which is exactly why a shelf of matching containers reads as calm at a glance, while a jumble of mismatched ones reads as work before you've touched a single thing. A common Japanese kitchen habit favors uniform, stackable containers, corners flush against corners, so the eye reads the whole shelf as a single clean block instead of a dozen separate items competing for attention. The practical action isn't replacing everything at once. It's simply not replacing the odd, mismatched piece the next time it wears out, and letting a matching set grow naturally, one purchase at a time, until the whole shelf eventually aligns on its own. Idea 4. Vertical storage claiming the wall instead of the counter. A wide, flat dish rack sitting on the counter is one of the most common quiet space thieves in an ordinary kitchen, permanently occupying prime counter real estate for something used for a few minutes after every meal and then left sitting there, full or empty, for the rest of the day. A narrow, vertical rack or a wall-mounted option like a magnetic knife strip, freeing an entire drawer, moves that same function off the counter and onto the wall, where it was never actually competing with anything else for space. The practical action is a simple audit. Look at what's permanently sitting on your counter purely out of habit, and ask whether it could climb the wall instead, freeing the flat surface back for actual use. The shift is simple. Counters are for working, walls are for storing. Most kitchens quietly reverse the two without ever deciding to. We've handled the kitchen. The next stop is the room most people give up organizing the fastest, precisely because it looks fine at a glance and only reveals its wasted space when you actually go looking for it. Idea 5. A second rod. Doubling the closet without doubling the footprint. A standard closet uses roughly half its actual vertical space. One rod, hung at a height built for the longest garment anyone owns, wasting the entire lower half for anything shorter, shirts, folded items, anything that never needed that much clearance in the first place. That unused lower half isn't a small loss either. Over the full width of a closet, it often amounts to more usable hanging space than the entire top rod is currently providing. A second rod, installed about a foot below the first, doubles usable hanging space in the exact same footprint. A closet that used to hold one season of clothing comfortably holds two, without the closet growing by a single inch. Idea 6. compression storage for anything out of season. Bulky out-of-season clothing and spare bedding, folded normally, take up a disproportionate amount of closet space for months at a time, doing absolutely nothing. Vacuum-sealed or simple compression bags flatten that same volume down to a fraction of its folded size, released again in minutes with nothing more than a hand pump when the season actually changes. There's a well-documented psychological cost to a closet where nothing quite fits. Every morning becomes a tiny negotiation. Squeeze it in, leave it hanging half out, deal with it later. Again. Small, low-stakes decisions like this, repeated daily, measurably wear down the mental energy available for decisions that actually matter later in the day. A closet engineered so everything genuinely has room removes that particular tax before 8 a.m. has even properly started. The real test of a change like this usually isn't the everyday routine at all. It's the first time you pack for a trip afterward. And notice that finding room for a suitcase takes minutes instead of the usual scramble of pulling things out to make space. The practical action for both ideas is small and gradual. Add 1 second rod section or compress 1 bag's worth of out-of-season items, and notice how much breathing room even that partial change creates. We've handled the entryway, the kitchen, and the closet, 3 rooms where clutter is visible the moment you look. The next few ideas move into a room that changes its entire identity depending on the hour, something almost no Western living room is designed to do. Idea 7. Furniture that folds away the moment its job is finished. In many Western homes, a dining table sits in the same spot doing nothing for the overwhelming majority of the day, permanently claiming floor space it only actually uses during meals. It's rarely questioned because a dining table simply feels like a fixture, something a room is supposed to have, whether or not it's currently in use. A low foldable table, common in many traditional Japanese living spaces, sits flat against the wall for most of the day and unfolds to the exact center of the room only when a meal is actually happening, folding away again the moment plates are cleared. The same square footage serves as open floor space, dining space, and open floor space again, all within a single evening, watched over the course of one ordinary night. The transformation stops feeling like a clever trick and starts feeling almost obvious. At 6, it's simply an open room. By 7, it's a dining room with steam rising off 2 bowls. By 9, the table has folded away, and the room has quietly returned to being exactly what it was before, empty in precisely the places it needs to be empty. The practical action here doesn't require replacing your entire dining setup. It starts with asking, honestly, which piece of furniture in your main living space you actually use for the smallest fraction of your day, and whether a foldable or nesting alternative could give that floor back to you the rest of the time. Idea 8. Sliding doors instead of swinging ones. A standard hinged door permanently reserves a quarter circle of floor space for its own swing radius, whether anyone is walking through it or not, space that can never be used for anything else the entire time that door exists in that spot. A sliding door, common in traditional Japanese interiors, reclaims that entire quarter circle back for the room. The floor a swinging door would have permanently claimed simply becomes usable space again. The practical action isn't necessarily ripping out every interior door in your home. It's noticing which doors in tight spaces, a small bathroom, a narrow hallway closet, are quietly taxing you a quarter circle of floor every single day, and considering a sliding or pocket door alternative specifically there. Idea 9. Seating that's secretly storage. A storage bench, doing double duty as a place to sit and a place to hold blankets, spare cushions, or seasonal bedding, occupies the same single square foot of floor as an ordinary bench, while quietly performing 2 jobs instead of 1. From the outside, it looks like nothing more than an ordinary place to sit. Lift the lid, and it reveals an entire winter's worth of bedding folded neatly inside, storage that never once had to compete with the room for its own separate footprint. The practical action is a simple substitution. The next time you're choosing a bench, ottoman, or seat for a small space, favor one with genuine storage capacity underneath over one that's purely decorative. We're almost through the house. The final idea lives in the room most people write off entirely, convinced there's simply nothing to be done about it. Idea 10. Wall-mounted storage in the bathroom, claiming the one vertical foot everyone forgets. Bathrooms tend to accumulate clutter fastest of any room, precisely because it feels too wet, too small, and too easy to just let things pile on the edge of the tub and call it finished. A magnetic shower caddy mounted straight to the tile holds bottles upright with no sagging shelf and no suction cup, slowly losing its grip. A slim rack installed directly over the toilet tank turns the single most commonly wasted vertical foot in most bathrooms into real shelving for towels and supplies that would otherwise be stuffed under the sink or behind the pipes, in the one drawer nobody can ever quite close all the way. There's a concept in design psychology called affordance, the idea that an object's placement silently tells your hand what to do with it before you've consciously thought about it at all. A caddy mounted at exactly arm height doesn't just hold shampoo. It tells your hand where to reach every single morning without a single decision required. Before a change like this, a bathroom typically looks the same everywhere. 4 or 5 bottles balanced along the edge of the tub, one of them always tipping over the moment the water pressure shifts. None of them actually chosen for that spot, just left there because the edge of a tub is where bottles end up when nobody decides otherwise. The caddy doesn't just move them off the floor. It makes that decision once, permanently, so it never has to be made again on a rushed morning with the shower already running. The practical action is choosing one bottle currently balanced on the edge of your tub and giving it a permanent wall-mounted home this week. Nothing more elaborate than that. We've now walked through all 10 ideas: vertical shoes, a single catch tray, matching containers, wall-mounted kitchen storage, a second closet rod, compression storage, foldable furniture, sliding doors, storage seating, and wall-mounted bathroom storage. There's a word for what all 10 are quietly doing together, and it happens to be one of the oldest ideas in Japanese design. Ma. It doesn't translate cleanly into English, but the closest approximation is meaningful empty space. Not an absence, not a room simply missing furniture, but space deliberately left open because whatever surrounds it matters more when it isn't crowded up against something else. A folded table isn't just a table put away. It's an hour of floor handed back to the room. A sliding door isn't just a door. It's a quarter circle of ma that a hinged door would have permanently claimed, whether or not anyone was using it. None of the 10 ideas on this list required a single wall to move, or a single square foot to be added to the house. Each one is a small, deliberate decision about where an object lives the moment it isn't being used, made instead of the far easier, far more common default almost every home falls into without ever quite choosing it, simply leaving things wherever they happen to land. Most advice about small spaces treats the walls as the problem. Squeeze the furniture in, shrink the footprint, apologize for what doesn't fit. Ma starts from the opposite direction entirely. The walls were never the real problem. The problem was always the objects that had quietly claimed permanent residence in the space between them, whether or not they were doing anything useful there at the time. It's worth sitting with how differently that reframes a small home. Move an object, even temporarily, and the space it was standing in doesn't vanish along with it. It simply becomes available again for whatever the next hour actually needs it for. None of the 10 ideas we've walked through today arrived all at once in a single weekend either. In a home built around this thinking, they tend to arrive one at a time over months. Each new habit only added once the last one has already stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like simply how things are done. So here is a simple way to start using this tonight without touching all 10 ideas at once, which is exactly the kind of decision fatigue this whole video has been describing. Call it the one shelf rule. Pick one room, just one, and find a single object currently living on the floor or a flat surface out of pure habit, not necessity. Give it a vertical, deliberate home this week. A shelf, a hook, a wall-mounted rack, anything that gets it off the horizontal surface your eye reads first when you walk in. Don't touch the other rooms yet. Let one small, deliberate decision breathe on its own before adding a second. There's no version of this where a single weekend finishes the job, and that's fine. There's only a version where, a year from now, you've quietly made 10 decisions of your own and can barely remember when most of them happened. A small home doesn't feel large because it's empty. It feels large because nothing in it is fighting your eye for the same square foot of attention. Tonight, choose your one object and give it its one deliberate place. Which of these 10 ideas surprised you the most? Tell me the number in the comments and I'll read through them. If this changed how you look at your own home, subscribe to the Japanese Reset for more small Japanese ideas that create meaningful, lasting change without requiring you to overhaul your entire life at once. And if you know someone whose home is technically bigger than this one and somehow still feels more crowded, send them this. They'll understand exactly why you thought of them. A home doesn't need more space to feel calmer. It just needs one decision, made on purpose, about where everything already in it is allowed to belong.